Okay, welcome back to instalment number 37 of Zack Complains About How Bloody Cold It Is.
37? Jesus, Zack.
I mean, you complain, but yesterday you lost your... Sorry, we're joined by Andrew Dorman, who is a regular on this show, which is why I haven't given him a proper or professional... I can't even pretend that's why I haven't given you a proper or professional introduction. I just don't do proper and professional introductions on this show.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. But yesterday you lost your coat.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So, in my defence, I took a very similar, probably more stylish coat and managed to transfer my wallet and my passport, but not my car keys. So I spent 1 a.m. this morning floundering around Oxford looking for my keys, which was a bit embarrassing. But we're here now.
We are here now. So Andy Dorman, as you know, one of our resident 19th century military experts, an expert on the Irish military establishment.
19th century. It's very cold.
We're only at an 18th century conference. Andrew Dorman's here, folks. He's our resident 18th century military history expert, and particularly, is it the English military establishment you cover or the Irish? And funnily enough, you've been talking exactly about that in a paper that I enjoyed a great deal because there was a lot of crime and punishment in there.
Yes.
We had an interesting question about whether or not flogging was a means of killing people, which we both have views on. So have you been, apart from like losing your various pieces of attire?
Yeah, apart from losing attire and appendages to the cold, it's been a really good conference. Really interesting. I think one of the nice things about this conference is the blend of history and English lit, because you get a different... It's interdisciplinary without being too interdisciplinary. So it's been a really nice kind of mix of the two, and it's gone really well. I've actually seen some really interesting papers.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very striking that you and I have basically been to the same panels the whole way through, and we chose entirely independently of one another.
Yeah, I think that maybe speaks to either the popularity of the English lit portion or the effectiveness of the conference programmers in kind of laying down which are kind of, for lack of a better term, harder history. And I don't mean that in terms of difficulty, I mean in terms of kind of methodology. Yeah.
So your work, obviously we talk about your work a great deal, but I do want to talk about your paper because that is kind of the point of why we're doing these Vox Pops.
Sure.
I was going to say we had a ding-dong. That's a gross exaggeration even by my standards. We had a little bit of a discussion about particularly the use of hanging. So talk me through this is going to risk kind of turning into a sort of crime and punishment nerd zone, but...
Hell yeah.
Your findings on hanging, talk me through it.
So I think the reason for the ding-dong, and if Zack and I had a ding-dong, it would look like two chopsticks falling on each other.
You're not wrong.
So I have, or rather I say I have, James Kelly wrote a really interesting book full of gallows speeches from the early 18th century, and some of them are soldiers. And a couple of the cases that I took and ran with were their Irish Catholic soldiers, which in the early 18th century should have been rare, given the fact it was illegal to recruit Irish Catholics into the British Army at that point. But obviously, they did anyway. And in one of these, he's a repeat offender, and I can't remember what his first crime was, but his second crime was theft, and he's sentenced to hang after that. He's flogged for the first offence, and then he's hung for the second. And one of the arguments that I was making in the paper was that civilian justice is more severe for the military than the military justice system, and that it was in a soldier's interest and in the interests of his commanding officers to have soldiers tried by military courts. It keeps things in-house, but also they can be a little bit more discretionary, whereas civilian justice is a little bit more black and white. And I said, perhaps foolishly, given my fellow panel members, that these two things are connected, that this case of theft, in a lot of the examples I've seen, theft is punished with maybe 200 lashes, whereas in this case, he's hung. So I was making a connection between the two, which maybe isn't entirely fair given the time differential, but also the fact that it was theft from a civilian, whereas theft from a soldier is a very different thing.
Yeah, in fairness, when you made the comment, I didn't realise you were making reference and comparison to regimental court-martial cases either, where, again, punishments would be more lenient. And my mind immediately went to general court-martial cases where, of course, people are executed for theft of varying kinds.
I mean, I've got a couple of hundred regimental court-martial cases. I've got 2 general. They just don't survive. I've got nothing.
So you can't see this because obviously I'm behind the camera. that's astonished me that
Yeah.
you've got so little general court-martial
Yeah, and I
data.
only have the regimental ones on the goodwill of Don Hagest, who very kindly sent me things he found in the Parliamentary Archives in London. But I've got, I think, 10 regiments total, which is at a very small, narrow window. It's something which in Irish military history is gold dust, because so much of what we had was burnt. Maybe there is more, but if I find it, you'll know about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I look forward to it. One of the things that particularly struck me, both as you were responding to this Vox Pop, but also as we were responding to questions over the course of the panel, was that from a civilian perspective, actually, there's a pressure to go the other way. And one of the things that I found over the course of the doctorate was that there are associations for the prosecution of felons. These are effectively subscribers' organisations that are designed to distribute the costs, and you pay a subscription to it, and then if you end up needing to take somebody to court for theft, then the money comes out of this sort of joint pot. And one of the pieces of advice that they give these associations is, if the offender is a soldier, take it to a military court, because then there's no associated cost of bringing the case. Now, I actually think that doesn't work particularly well for the victim, because I've seen very little evidence of people being fined, soldiers being fined, and that would therefore indicate that actually people aren't being reimbursed, because the army would want to recoup that money out of a soldier's wages. So I kind of saw it kind of the opposite of that, and obviously these two things coexist within the same world and in the same period. So I'm doing a lot of head scratching now about how I need to amend the supposed book that I'm writing.
Yeah, because I think the army was trying people anyway, so it kind of makes sense that it would be a cost-saving measure. I haven't seen explicit recommendation for it, but I think it does make a lot of sense that if they have this judicial system in place, and if they're willing to be that little bit more discretionary, etc., then do it in-house. But pushing civilians to it is a different story. Perhaps there's a regional dimension to it. Maybe it's because I'm dealing with Ireland, where there's a little bit more tension, and the vast majority of the population are disenfranchised Irish Catholics who have very little legal power as is. So they're not going to be recommended, because they'll just be told go away. So maybe there's something on that front, but it's something we're going to have to unpack at a warmer conference in June.
Speaking of the cold, are you sufficiently frozen that you don't want to engage in your Osprey rant?
Oh no, I could happily rant about that. So in the prep for this conference, I'm not going to name the author, I'm not going to name the book, but it's about Ireland in some capacity. And this author wrote that regiments based in Ireland were likely to go to the dogs because of neglect, which flies against the very purpose of the Irish military establishment in Britain's eyes, which was to preserve regiments for service elsewhere. And why the hell would you have an establishment that lets its regiments fall apart, if not to be sent elsewhere? And given the fact that most of these regiments do fight in the American War of Independence quite effectively, they fight the French-Indian War and 7 Years' War again effectively, and later go on to fight in the Napoleonic Wars very effectively. It's a stupid argument. Okay, 1798 was a disaster, but at the same time, the rebellion was quelled in a few months. Like, it started poorly for the British Army, and then, when I say it was a disaster for the British Army. It wasn't necessarily a disaster for Irish nationalism, but that's a different argument altogether. But it's that classic. Basically, Ralph one of the Abercrombies, said that the army was formidable to anyone except the enemy. And this guy took that quote and ran with it. But that was a man who just was on the cusp of leaving the office of Lord Lieutenant because he was dissatisfied with the role, or Commander-in-Chief, because he was dissatisfied with the way the Lord Lieutenant was treating him. And it was a resignation letter, and he was angry. And that has informed 100 years of history of the British Army in Ireland. Yeah, it was frustrating to read, but at least I got to put it to right to 40 people in a conference room or however many attended, I don't know, 20.
Well, that's how it starts. And then, of course, this goes out to another 4 people,
Yeah.
probably. I could question you all day, but people will be watching this video if they're watching the video version on Spotify, and they will notice that our breath is steaming because it is that cold. So in the interest of finding something that's a little less Arctic in terms of an environment, we will call a halt there. But just remind folks of where they can find out more about your work, Andy.
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm currently working for the Centre for Economics Policy and History, and that's where a lot of my energy is going at the moment. In terms of my own historical research, there will be a book, hopefully this year, published with Boydell and Brewer in their Irish Historical Monograph series. So you can keep an eye for that. And then I annoy Zach on podcasts periodically. So if you're subscribed to this podcast, chances are you'll hear my dulcet tones. And whenever I'm on an episode, if you set up a drinking game of taking a shot anytime I say the word Irish, you'll be hammered. So that's...
And on that promise, with more 18th century military ways of war stuff incoming on the show very soon. Andy, thanks so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and safe journey back.
Thank you.
Folks, do me a favour. Go and review the show. Do it right now. 5 stars, please, and a comment, crucially. It takes you seconds, but it sends the algorithm wild and catapults us up the rankings. It's the most powerful thing you can do to support the hours of content that we provide for free. Love the show? Never want to miss the latest news? Sign up to our newsletter. The link is in the description, and get regular Napoleonic bulletins direct to your inbox. Looking for a present for the Napoleonicist in your life? We have a shop packed with Napoleonic Wars Pod merch. Check out the link in the description. And did you know you can now gift people subscriptions to the Patreon perks we offer? So, if you want to treat someone to our online course, exclusive Meet the Author sessions, green room access to recordings, and exclusive episodes, head to patreon.com/napwarspod to find out more. Much love to all our Patreon supporters who are enjoying a rejuvenated and revitalized offering of perks on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the Napoleonic Wars Pod to find out how you can join a buzzing community of like-minded Napoleonic nerds who are enjoying things like courses, socials, book clubs, green room access to recordings, early releases, exclusive episodes, and much, much more. Their support is empowering us to triple our output and keep you entertained with Napoleonic nerdery on a near daily basis. Prices start from just £2 a month. So if you can spare the cost of a cup of coffee each month to support us, it would mean a huge amount and might even fund some documentary work. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording in mid-January 2024, were in the mentioned in dispatches tier: Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Stephen Colson, Jim Getz, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramus, Anthony Gumbau, Anonymous American, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Carol Dixon-Smith, Roland Shark, Giovanni, Jean-Baptiste Van Merlen, Darla Vincent, Peter Findley, Jeff Maple, Ian Harding, Indiana Fats, Joe Ayres, Robin Brasher, Daniel Friedman, and Jonathan Willets. The Admirals: John Haynes, Mike Guest, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Priest, David Maxwell, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Kate Walcombe, Clemens Beman, Charles McKay, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Jason Moran, and Tim Pritchard. The Chiefs of Staff: Adam Coslin. The Marshals: Ryan Diamond and JC Kaiser. The Legion de Scholars: Dan Hazelwood and Bob Burnham. And in the Crown Yourself tier, Emperor of the First French Empire Todd Campbell and the Duke of Wellington Laird Campbell. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, Josh, and Zoe, take care of yourselves, folks. Stay well. And as always, thank you for listening.